gather with intention to multiply our possibilities of being in relation with one another, big and small. And by that, really allowing for the emergence of repair and reimaginings. We are hurt in relation to ourselves and one another, but we also heal in relation.
In this moment, in particular, to be fiercely vulnerable, to surrender to ourselves, to our grief, to our rage, to our failures, and really make space for those. They are enough. They're more than enough. We are enough, and those things are also enough. They're so powerful. And they're also the compass to our freedoms. Being with our grief and our rage in intentional ways and in togetherness will show us the way in the smallest way right now, in this moment, and beyond it.
Hello, my dears. It's good to be with you here. I hope this week's episode really speaks to something deep in your body and a possibility of how we live fully with everything that's happening in our world. Don't forget that you can join the rhythm and meditate with us live. It's a really beautiful space, and you are very welcome. The link is in the show notes. My guests are the Emergent Justice Collective, a group of transformative justice practitioners, grief workers, and embodiment activists who are in the process of unlearning and shedding the colonial framing and roots of their legal training. They came together to embody justice by healing from and practicing self-accountability around their entanglements in systems of oppression and by caring for their collective exits from institutions and cultures reproducing such systems. They are committed to practicing towards collective liberation by reclaiming responses to intra- and interpersonal, as well as collective forms of violence, and nurturing embodied anti-colonial visions and practices of international justice. They do so by holding and facilitating spaces to feel, write, move, craft, and be with one another. Here we speak to three of their founding members: Valentina Azarova, Alexandra Lily Cather, and Lisa Marie Rudd. You can find their bios on our website along with links to everyone mentioned. This episode is made in partnership with The Radicals, a storytelling initiative powered by the Gorilla Foundation that explores contemporary radicalism, reclaims what it means to be radical, showcases the diverse faces of root cause activism worldwide, and tells effing inspiring and authentic stories that are meant to reframe activists, uproot misconceptions, and reroute rebellions. You can listen to our recent episode, 248, on reclaiming radicalism to find out more about this project. In this conversation, we speak of justice stemming from love and the knowing of our shared interdependence. Our movements are extensions of ourselves, of our personalities, our rage and grief, and the communities to which we belong. Liberation begins in the tender spaces between us, in orienting towards relationality, even as systems of oppression demand otherwise. In this episode called The Radical Act of Staying Soft, Grief as a Portal of Possibility, we explore the question, what does it take to stay human and together when everything asks us to harden? I hope this helps you feel less alone in the ache and more alive in your care for the world. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Tala Oak. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies, to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams, and we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. It is a real delight to welcome you, Lily, Lisa, and Val, into all that we are. Before we get into visions and visions of the futures of our wildest dreams, I would love for each of you to introduce yourself and what brought you into this collective. Lily?
Thank you so much for sharing this time with us and for offering us the opportunity to be with one another and you for this conversation and for this, really relational practice of envisioning. I'm Lily. I use they or no pronouns. I am tending with the reality of what it means to be human at this point in time on Earth. And I'm holding my intention with a lot of different tensions and a lot of different challenges. What brought me to the Emergent Justice Collective, or maybe the Emergent Justice Collective has brought ourselves to each other, is really the emergence, but also urgency we all felt, although I don't want to speak for others, but I want to speak to the collectivity and the healing that I felt being with others that also recovered and intentionally moved away and reoriented away from the coloniality of our education, in particularly our legal education, the harm associated with preconceived ideas of justice that are grounded in coloniality, the upholding of global hierarchies, the kind of non-justice possibilities for colonial harms and existing global hierarchies. When the Emergent Justice Collective found us and we found each other, it was not only the biggest invitation to step into a healing process, but also the biggest invitation to imagine the otherwise and to really practice the world as we see and feel it, as we grow and continue to emerge as beings, but also to do that in community and to really give justice another chance of existence outside of institutions, outside of frameworks that thus far have not been able to offer it. And so what it really means if our bodies and our hearts and our minds become sites of justice with and for one another.
So much gratitude to be in conversation with you and together. Yeah, Val, also they or no pronouns. I care very, very deeply for the us that is possible, that is longing, that we belong to, both in our embodiments of grief and rage and transformation, in our belonging to each other, the intimacies that are so strongly within us, between us, with nature, and that are stronger than the systems that we are made to resist and to defy every day and to grieve fiercely and vulnerably together. I have moved from and am moving from having spent much time looking for justice and accountability in these systems and through these systems, and to practicing and otherwise through transformative justice, abolition feminisms, grief tending, and mutual aid. And Emergent Justice Collective has been a home, has been a homemaking, has been a remembering of justice as just us. And it's been a transformation that I love you both so much for being with me in.
Can I go? It's a pleasure being here with you all, and thank you for having us, Amisha. Yeah, my name is Lisa, pronouns she, her. And the way I came to the Emergent Justice Collective, or the way that we came to co-found the Emergent Justice Collective, for me, it feels kind of like a journey, like a lot of shedding of old scripts, old categories of how things need to be done. And yeah, I came from a somewhat traditional legal education, thinking that my path was to be a human rights lawyer and to fight for justice through court systems for survivors of mass atrocities, and found myself just feeling like something was really off with those systems. There's a lot of self-righteousness there in these organizations that do that kind of work. There's a lot of trauma being reenacted. There's a lot of focus on results rather than being with each other and healing. And yeah, there's a lot of binaries there in terms of who's good, who is bad. And so the Emergent Justice Collective for me was like a counter, like almost like an antidote to that, a place where we came together and where there was no outcome, there was no goal, there was no performing, and there was just a kind of sitting together in a circle and talking and being together and holding community spaces and grieving, slowing down. When I feel into it, that's what being with the Emergent Justice Collective feels like for me and how I came to it.
Beautiful. What is alive for you as a collective when I ask, like, what are the futures of your wildest dreams?
We often talk about this concept of embodied justice. Siblings here can speak more to what it means for them, but through our conversations, I think we've often described it as like a way of practicing justice rather than trying to achieve it in some formal sense, and being in our bodies, which the dominant systems do everything they can to keep us disembodied and dissociated. And I think our wildest dreams of the future would be a future where we can all be in our bodies and it's safe to be in our bodies and our bodies are cared for and we care for each other. But I think that's a big concept for us, the idea of embodied justice.
Yes, I would also add gathering as a practice of relationality, of a place where the reimagining can happen in community, but really also as a place of repair, that we can give ourselves an embodied feeling with ourselves and one another of what the otherwise feels like. I think all of us spend years not just witnessing, but being very close to sites of structural mass violence on an immense scale. Our bodies took in information about this on a daily level, even before social media was live streaming genocides, crimes against humanity, and war crimes of the most excruciating, magnitude. The places in where we engaged in this, information intake, but also really harm intake, did not allow us or people we were, being with through that, including survivors, their descendants, even their descendants before that, the possibility to grieve. So essentially our bodies were trained to disconnect and to disengage in an embodied way with the feelings and with the results that these images, these texts, these words, these statements brought to the forefront. And I think part of embodied justice that Lisa described is for me also to allow our bodies to be sites of archives for the past, the present, and the future. So there is this circularity that moves through us, right? I mean, we are here now. Obviously, all of our descendants are with us here. I also want to give a shout out. It's would have been my grandmother's 101st birthday today, who was not only my grandmother by like formality, but really one of my parents, but also life guides. And I think this is something we can honor as we move through this world, right? How can we be with one another so that our bodies can be these archives, these documenting, really loving homes of this is how reality is for us and many people. And we want to live through that. We are holding on to a future that looks different than it is now. And I think our bodies, they can do so much. They live through so much. They breathe. They're like made out of water. We are so connected to nature and connected to each other by default that this is really a map for us. And the more we can follow that map by being connected to ourselves, the more we also find to each other. That would be one offering.
Yeah, all of that, and so much more that language doesn't make possible. I guess to also resonate with so much of your work, Amisha, and the offerings of this podcast and the many guests on it that have also been our teachers and have brought in ancestral knowledge that we honor very much, to resonate with our ancestors and our ancestral responsibilities, to resonate with a very strong practice of self-accountability as collective care, fiercely practicing through and with our positionalities and our self-accountability, our entanglement in violence and complexity, and being within spaces that have caused us and many, and continue to cause us and many great harm, that reproduce harm, while seeking quite specifically forms of remediation, reparation, and whilst co-opting ideas of justice, possibilities of healing and transformation at an incredible scale. I speak to this both from Ukrainian, Russian ancestry, in my case, and from having lived and loved in Palestine for 8 years and many more. In fact, it remains a home. And in this moment, from a place of being with, learning from, and holding ourselves accountable to groups and voices and visions like those of Queers in Palestine, who we organize with others, to the realities of impossibility, to grieving those realities of impossibility, not as forms of hopelessness or despair, but actually as portals for possibility, for letting go, for surrendering to each other, for finding what I think for me, one of my greatest, holding truths is the relational culture of noticing and acknowledging that is made possible when we grieve, when we come back to ourselves and each other.
Thank you. Can you share more about grieving as a portal of possibility and on a more collective scale of possibility?
I think at this point, we would want to credit our grief. I don't want to say teacher, it's more like an elder, even though she's not that much older than us, but Toby, who we've done various grief facilitation trainings with, and who's taught us a lot about an Indigenous view of grief and Indigenous practices of grief. There's many examples today in the world where unmetabolized grief is what is keeping us disconnected in anger, what is fueling violence. For me, as a young justice practitioner, I was thinking that, justice court cases would heal people, or at least partially contribute to healing. But with the years and with experience, it always comes back to grief. It always comes back to grief. It comes back to what are our rituals? How do we come together to grieve who we've lost, what we've lost, and then how can we kind of sit together in the rubble and see where we go from there. We see these cycles of violence, whether it's with the ongoing genocide that we're seeing on our screens every day, or with other crises around the world. If we want to break it down very, very basic, it's the hurt people. And if I don't grieve, then I'm stuck in those cycles as a person, but also as a collective. And I think that's why we keep coming back to grief. We keep coming back to wanting to be with each other in grief, wanting to hold spaces for people to encounter their grief, to feel that they can safely be with their grief, because it's something that in this world that we've been active in for a while, the kind of NGO spaces, there's not yet a lot of talk of grief or space for grief, and spaces to pause and be like, what is this doing to us, what we're going through every day, and what is it doing to our bodies, and then to the next generations, and what grief are we holding from generations before us. So yeah, I think through our exchanges and our just kind of journeys of transformation and inquiry, we just keep coming back to grief all the time.
So many people that I would want to name, but Toby definitely is a mentor and elder who is in very dear relationship. Devin Attala's words on Palestinian grief and poem on grief as a portal are the words that I'm actually breathing with. I won't repeat them here, but maybe we can bring them in the resources and share them. And the podcast with Adrienne Marie Brown, where he offers on how, and I found the bit when we grieve, we can be in touch with the justice we have. And also we metabolize the harm. So for me, and in the experiences, the fractal, I think, experiences of collective grief tending that I have had, that we've had together and offered together as well. Sense making of the violence and learning around the violence and its impacts as part of healing, as necessary to healing, happens through this indescribable, sort of impalpable process of grieving, which is part of breathing as well. It's so daily. And when we take the space and presence and time to be with that, we are resisting the massive systems and cultures of avoidance, not just of grief, but also of intimacy and also of conflict, which is such it's also an entry point to so much of what brought us together, responses to violence and conflict, how we understand conflict, abuse, harm, how we mismanage, mishandle, perpetuate harm in the way that we respond to intrapersonal, interpersonal, and then international violence.
I would also offer grief as a portal for persons like me, who is a passport holder of Germany. That is a country that has been involved in several locations around the world in very severe forms of violence, colonial extractions, without any meaningful or tender invitations for repair or reparations. And so what it brings up for me is a responsibility in this daily privilege that I carry, and this daily descendancy of harm and violence that I carry. It also brings up an immense amount of grief. I think grief for me has been a portal to not fall back on the default option, which is guilt, and which I think we are observing now is replicating itself in the perpetuation of genocidal violence in Palestine, among others driven by Germany. And the white supremacy that allowed itself to manifest due to unprocessed grief stemming from colonial violences into genocidal violences later on, and they are now multiplying. So I think grief for us is a portal to exiting this circle and stepping aside and observing what other possibilities of being with one another and being with oneself are possible that hold transformation. And these will bring us back from the very big to the very small. So grief as a portal of understanding. And this, I think, comes from Adrienne Mary Brown, but we always hold it dear, the smallest all. Like grief brings us back to the very sobering possibilities of the everyday and the change makers we can all be on the everyday and the responsibility we may hold every day to be in that.
Thank you. I really resonate with everything that you're sharing, and I am sure that many of our listeners will too, as these times are really asking us to understand ourselves and the world in a different way. The introduction that led to us being here was through the Gorilla Foundation and this beautiful project that I'm part of, the Radicals. I wonder what comes alive for you around the things that you believe in being somehow radical in the world that we're currently in. And there's something in it that is about reclaiming radicalism away from this thing where it's been almost branded as something dangerous. But a lot of what actually appears to be radical now within the systems that we live in is just care. It's care, it's honoring human life. It's honoring the life of the more than human world. It's honoring each other and our freedom. Yet somehow we're in this place where that is a radical position to hold. And where it's almost being, with want of a better word, like branded in a way that really just takes us out of the humanity of what we're actually talking about here.
Yeah. I think the way I'm resonating with what you're sharing is with quite a bit of grief around the ways we often internalize seamlessly and maybe even, unwittingly and unintentionally the very systems that we are part of, that we are entangled in, that we cannot fully disentangle from, and that we reproduce in movement spaces and in the most radical movement spaces. I think that as Emergent Justice Collective, the three of us are, and the things we do as a collective are maybe more intentionally oriented towards addressing certain kinds of spaces, and then the three of us are part of all sorts of other spaces in the locations that we're in and in different constellations together, then again come together around those other spaces, and those other spaces are movement spaces, or collectives or assemblies or protests and various attempts at safer, braver spaces for different groups. I'm in Athens. I've been here for 5 years, and I've seen a lot, both as a transformative justice practitioner that facilitates conflicts and collectives, and as someone who's been part of those conflicts. And the heartbreak is huge, and the grief is huge, and there is no space for that either. And I'm resonating with that, or that's coming up for me, and resonating with what you're sharing, because it feels to me like, because we don't bring collective care in the same way that, of course, again, those who put it so carefully to us, like Cara Page and Erica Woodland in their long-standing work on healing justice lineages, now archive of that for decades. We have been queer failing. We are part of failing systems that fail us, and we are not holding those failures with care. We're not offering each other care in the ways in which we reproduce labels, in the ways in which we co-opt. We are co-opted. We get co-opted. Maybe we even co-opt our struggles to come back to separability and competition and comparison, really. And so for me, this being better than or greater than or being radical has been somehow part of that co-optation move that we've internalized and we've reproduced between us in many, many ways, in many hurtful ways, whether someone is Zionist or anti-Semitic or many other things in this moment that is also coming out of us.
What it brings up for me is this question of what is our orientation here in understanding this, right? Radical to whom? Our teacher, Mariam Kaba, in Let This Radicalize You is pretty crystal clear about the fact that being radical just means being committed towards life, being committed towards the roots that makes life possible and that sustains life. And so to me, the reorientation this would offer is, who are we giving space to be the vantage point of how we view ourselves vis-a-vis how can we invite something much more expansive that is so much more urgent at this moment. And then also being honoring of the various forms of what different people feel is necessary to sustain life. And that may look very different depending on your locality, on, the conditions you are in, the structures you are up against. But I think what we can lose among these differences is really our relationality and love for one another, and to staying connected and very respectful and honoring of the very different forms or things people may engage in to make life possible.
When you were speaking, Lily, about radical connection and vulnerability, Francis Hempel talks about radical healing, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, Amisha. The most radical thing we can do in this moment is to stay soft, I feel, to stay open-hearted even when it hurts, and to keep staying present with what is, with one another, and to keep taking care of each other and ourselves.
Thank you for listening. If this conversation is stirring something in you, that beautiful restlessness that whispers, there is another way, then you're exactly who the rhythm is for. It's our weekly membership where the future is woven through breath, stillness, and energy work. We gather live so we can see each other's faces and truly be with one another. If you're walking an unlinear path and want to root deeper into your intuition, power, and presence, come into the rhythm. This show is ad-free, algorithm-free, and full of soul, and it's kept alive by people like you. This is for the quiet rebels, the rhythm makers, the ones who know another way is already here, and you are invited. Join at allthatweare.org and explore other ways to get involved through beautiful leadership mentoring, our live retreats, and the full course library. And now, back to the episode. I want to read something that you wrote that has questions within it that feel like what we need to be exploring. You said, all that we are revokes in us no justice, just us. Saying of transformative justice movement spaces in lineages with Black feminist and Indigenous lineages. Justice lives in each of us, and much of the violence we are subject to calls upon us to unlearn and undo the systems of colonization and capitalism and their effects on our everyday ways of being and knowing ourselves and each other. What would justice feel and look like in our body so that we can call it joy, pleasure, love, and so it can bring us healing and transformation from ongoing violences and towards ways of being that do not reproduce them? And I'm really curious to explore this question with you, partly because what I've seen that can happen is that when activist minded humans, which is basically all of us these days, when we go into that space of pleasure and like the everyday joy, that then a lot of the bypass can come in. And actually we can then be in like pleasure and joy as a disconnection and a separation from the very real realities that are part of our world. And that actually the privilege of being able to live in those joys and pleasure, because often it's people that are somewhat sheltered from some of the harsher realities of the systems that we're in, that then we can come into this disconnection. And I know that what you're going to offer here is not that. And I'm really curious to explore this more. So to ask you your own question again, what would justice feel and look like in our body so that we can call it joy, pleasure, and love? And so it can bring us healing and transformation from ongoing violences and towards ways of being that do not reproduce them. And I want to offer that my experience is that many people that live in the rougher edges of our systems are often, even though in survival mode, really quite good at living love, joy, solidarity, and community. And that somehow in a more Western experience of the world, it's much harder, even though many of us are not in survival. Often people feel like they're in survival, but it's not actually survival in the way that it is in other parts of the world. And there's something within that, I feel, that is because community is so broken, and not the kind of community like, oh, I pay $30 a month and I'm part of this community, or I go to this like, class and I feel a connection to these people. But actually the types of community that just mean you're living life together, that just mean that you're in a completely shared reality of life, whether you like each other or not. And that it's not even really about whether you like each other or not, because you're just there together in acceptance of each other, living in close proximity and doing life and sharing what you have. I know that you probably have had this experience of when you go into the homes of people that have so much less than the average kind of Western reality, that often you just are met with so much welcoming and generosity and giving of gifts. And so I feel like it's important to share that, because I feel that those of us that are living in a more Western system are in a process of unlearning that we're actually very poor in this way, and that we don't know how to do it, and that we are longing for it in our bones. And we used to know how to do it everywhere. All humans used to know how to do this, but we don't. And so there's something in that that feels important to say, because there's something quite bizarre in and of itself that we have to have like movements and books and collectives about this when it is what it is to be innately human. We feel a lot of grief for what's happening in lots of other parts of the world. But I also know that in those parts of the world that often they have that. There is that extraordinary level of care that's like generosity that doesn't even need to be labeled, that just is.
Yeah, very much in agreement with that, and very much the reality. I was living in Palestine, where I was taken in, as sort of part of a chosen family and community, and where mutual aid did not need to be named, or things like collective care did not need to be named, and where this has continued in the current moment very much, from so many of the stories that come through. It's similar to the way I guess I was thinking about this radicalism label, and the labels and the performative ways in which we awkwardly show up. And I say awkwardly with compassion on purpose, because I don't think we choose sometimes in our activisms to be necessarily performative. But there's very little of what then we label as, let's say, decolonial solidarity, the solidarity that's supposed to not be reproducing of liberal systems. We feel like we need theories and books and ways to rationalize what and distinguish between like what we don't want to be doing and what we should be doing. And I agree with that very much, which is why I guess we start and we end and we are with the embodied knowledges, with these knowledges that cannot be captured in a podcast, that cannot be captured in a moment of encounter, but that live beyond any one of us, that don't belong to any one of us, and at the same time that are very much in every one of us. I don't think I would be who I am today if it wasn't for the three of us making each other's business, and much more, to use Gwendolyn Brooks's words. I wouldn't be who I am today for many, many more people who've also shared through books and poems and otherwise remotely have touched me. And I also honor everyone in their respective places on their journeys, the conditioning that systems very actively succeed to perpetuate, again, also in movement spaces, very much in movement spaces where many of us come into with a certain expectation, not for purity or innocence, but at least for self-accountability and humility, and a different kind of way of showing up for each other and ourselves. And yes, very much for colonial grief. That's real. And that's how life is actually full of the joys and the decolonial love, to use Sarah Mahmoud's words again, kind of the Palestinian wisdom that doesn't need to be theorized, but has been by her, for instance. Yeah, there's so much to be said about what we do when we capture knowledge or try to impart it in the old ways.
Yes, to everything you said, Val. I also don't know who I would be without you. I want to invite us to untangle ourselves from some of these binaries of people in the Western world are like this and people who are closer to struggle are like that. Although everything you said, I definitely resonated with. But I think there's the power of coloniality, that racial capitalism that we live in, that destroys communities, that keeps us disconnected from each other and our bodies. And it's a spectrum. I think in all parts of the world, we see people who are more in that, and we see people who have managed to preserve some more of their humanity. And at the same time, yes, the closer we are to the centers of power in this world, I think the more we are prone to really, really buy into the systems. And I wanted to connect to what you said about leaning into joy, and then that becoming also a bypassing. And I think it's really a dance we're always engaging in every day. I live on a tiny island in the North Sea. People here are on holiday. Most of the time, most people I engage with are on holiday. And of course, not the people who live here, but I have beautiful days in nature with people where it can feel like the world is intact. And I get to tap into that and then take power from that and then never forget that the world is not intact. But it's a dance every day. And I think for all of us, and we can be enticed and like drawn to the bypassing and to the, oh, but everything's fine. And we owe it to ourselves, really, but to everyone else as well, to not forget that, yeah, there's a lot of struggle in the world and we're all hopefully fighting for liberation. And then I also want to just bring into the space that feeling guilty about that is also coloniality at play. So when I feel guilty about being too joyful, and I start to feel guilty about bypassing, that feeling of guilt is again a mechanism to disconnect from myself, from others. So it's like this constant dance we're in, and it's complex and it's weird. And I think it's so beautiful to be in it with others, with different positionalities, with different stories, different perspectives, so that we can constantly kind of pull ourselves out of the bypassing or pull ourselves out of the guilt and just always enter into connection again and again and again. And because that's where the good stuff lies. And that's hopefully what justice feels like, you know, to go back to our own questions that we asked ourselves.
Thank you so much for sharing that, both, and also thank you for the very thoughtful question. I don't think I've ever heard something we wrote read out to us before by someone else. So thank you for that experience. I think what ties are a couple of different points of departure, but also arrival that we spoke about. There's a return to what it means to be human at this moment. That is necessary if we want to be radical, if we want to sustain life, if we want to truly embody joy. And I think there is a level of how being part or descendant of a colonizer nation, living in racial capitalism, living in the upper privileges of global hierarchy, came with a price that deprived us of a very essential part of our humanness. And so to be radical means to work on reclaiming that humanness that we lost, or that spiritual crisis of having lost connections with each other by means of how we define success, how we define justice, or even these being goalposts for anything, has really deprived us from a huge part of what it means to be human. And where people that are severely and continuously affected by structural mass violence for generation really have sustained that, have sustained embodied joy because it is their survival. I think a very present memory that I have is of a woman. Her name is Valeria. She's Afro-Brazilian. She's part of my chosen family in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And during COVID, she lost both of her already adult son to COVID-19. By the time we met for the first time, it was 2 years later, and I will never forget the way she danced and smiled unapologetically at a family gathering. That profound perseverance was something I had until then never experienced in my, let's say, blood relations, but also in my, chosen family, my community, because of the privilege that we have and because of the humanness that systems deprived from us in order for these hierarchies to work. So I think to sustain life, to embody justice, to embody joy, also relates to this question of privilege that you hinted at. And I think that's something to dive in as well in this conversation. Like how is the privilege that we have connected to the humanness that we lost and to the lack of embodiment towards understandings of joy, and how instead joy has been sold as a distraction from being radical, from returning to being human, from sustaining life. We have a chance to change that.
Thank you. Those words were really powerful to receive. What is the call to action that you as a collective would like to leave us with? And there can be more than one. Doesn't have to be any rules here. And of course, they can be calls to being as well as action.
I think one would be to invite all the listeners to be with their grief, befriend their grief, be with their communities in grief, make space for it.
Gather with intention to multiply our possibilities of being in relation with one another, big and small. And by that, really allowing for the emergence of repair and reimaginings. We are hurt in relation to ourselves and one another, but we also heal in relation. So at this moment, the call to action for me would be together with intention.
In this moment, in particular, to be fiercely vulnerable, to surrender to ourselves, to our grief, to our rage, to our failures, and really make space for those. They are enough. They're more than enough. We are enough, and those things are also enough. They're so powerful. And they're also the compass to our freedoms. Being with our grief and our rage in intentional ways and in togetherness will show us the way in the smallest way right now, in this moment, and beyond it. And I guess those are also the intentions behind something we share with each other quite a bit, and sometimes playfully, sometimes seriously, and certainly with both joy and grief. We should free you to free Palestine, free you to free all the Palestines. Yeah, and we would love to also uplift our queer siblings from Queers in Palestine and their beautiful liberatory demands that we've shared, so we can maybe put them out there as well. And Toby Aye's work again and again and again.
And we might be posting more community spaces on our website. So stay tuned. Keep your eyes peeled, or whatever the kids say these days.
Thank you. How would you like our friends listening to connect with you if they are moved by what you've shared?
Our website is emergentjusticecollective.org.
Thank you so much, Lily, Lisa, and Val, for everything that you've shared here. And it feels like it could be the work of a lifetime to embody what's been shared here. And it is the work of a lifetime. It's also something that we have to do together. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was a beautiful space for us to think through things out loud, connect with you. It was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for making this exchange possible and for allowing for the internal and the external to arise and be in conversation. And I hope this can be the starting point of many beautiful relations. So for people listening, but also for us listening to each other. Yeah, with gratitude. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode Download our book, join our experiences, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast. And so it's made possible with you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership, retreats, and experiences. Share the episode with your friends and do drop us a note from time to time. Please hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so that others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors, and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silos through borders, timelines, or polarity. That in each and every moment, all that we are is here.